What up, YouTube? Ed coming back with probably my final video for the 2025 National. This is going to be some of my musings, some of my thoughts, observations that I took away from the week in Chicago. I knew going into the National it was going to be insanely overcrowded. I think that was pretty much expected because the National's growth just keeps growing every year, slightly by like 2, 3, 4, 5%. As we know, several years ago they broke the attendance record that was set back in 1991, I believe, in Anaheim. So it just keeps growing and growing, and you can definitely tell. I thought it was an absolute blessing that the weather this week in Chicago was as beautiful as it was, minus the day it was raining. It was a cool 70 degrees. It never got hot outside. We didn't get that blistering Chicago heat that we have been getting the previous Nationals. So that was truly a blessing because it didn't put a strain on the air conditioning, which I do truly believe if it was a typical Chicago summer where it was the mid 90s or higher 90s, we definitely probably would have had air conditioning problems just because of the sheer amount of people that were inside the Donald Stevenson Center. So there's that. It definitely was overcrowded, and I said this back in 2023. I really believe that the National has outgrown the Donald E. Stevenson Center. There's just so many people in the convention center that it's hard to navigate. I'm used to large crowds. I'm used to being at large events. I go to tons of concerts. And honestly, most of the time it felt like I was trying to navigate a crowd at a concert. Probably got bumped easily over 100 times during the course of the week. It is what it is. It's just really crowded. There's not a lot of space for people to move. So I'm used to that. But they definitely fixed the parking garage really nicely. There was tons of staff there to help the flow of traffic. So it wasn't a repeat of 2023 where it was an absolute nightmare to get out of that parking garage. The Rosemont staff definitely made a great adjustment and were helping the flow of traffic out of that parking garage. So big kudos to them. Thought the dealers were really, really great. There was tons of variety at this show. As you can see in the background are some of my pickups. We got pre-war, we got vintage, we got WNBA, we got modern, ultra modern, we got football. So the offerings at the show were really, really good. I thought the area by RBI Crew 7 was probably the best area of the show for me. It was just a great mixture of dealers who had tons of different cards. The variety over there was really, really ridiculous. It was really sweet. So there was just a lot of cards to go through. It's a massive show. Everyone's going to say that. It's just gigantic. Millions and millions and millions of cards in that building, and you got to go through and find a couple to add into your collection, or not. You can just go and hang out. You don't have to buy cards. All the dealer interactions I had were fantastic. I noticed dealers were incredibly aggressive buying cards off people. They were asking pretty much everyone that walked up to the table, at least from my experience, are you selling any cards? And I think the main reason for that, of the very aggressive buying nature of dealers, was because they were selling so many cards. The dealers made out absolutely fantastic. They were turning over so many cards that they needed more stock. I saw several dealers that didn't have nothing come Saturday. There was maybe 1 or 2 cards in the showcase, or maybe a value box or 2 that they maybe brought along and left in the truck or the car that they plopped out on the table. But there was a couple empty tables come Saturday just because everything they bought to the show was gone. So people were aggressively buying at the show. Dealers were aggressively buying. The amount of transactions that probably happened on the showroom floor, maybe it was in the billions. I know that may sound hyperbolic, but if you were there, there was just so many people buying, so many people flipping and selling to dealers. It was crazy. Speaking of selling to dealers, tons of that going on. As I just said, dealers were aggressively buying. But I always like to make it a point to see what people are selling to dealers. And I saw several pretty big transactions go down. Saw a gentleman sell an entire 1954 top set in poor to fair condition. I think he got $5,500 for that. The Aaron was in pretty good shape compared to the rest of the set. Obviously, the Aaron being the rookie and probably the key card in that 54 top set. But there was tons of vintage flipping going on, tons of modern flipping as well. And it's always just interesting to see that. And I think I said it years ago. I think a lot of the people that came in during the pandemic, who our communities will sometimes scoff at, these young kids who go around with their Pelican cases, I think a lot of them have transitioned to more of the vintage side of things. Not all of them, but I do think a good majority have. And when you see kids pulling out, 51 Bowman Mickey Mantles, or I saw a couple kids with 52 Topps Mantles. Saw it last year in Cleveland too. You just see really crazy cards. The madness and craziness that you just see at the National. These insane cards for insane prices, and people want to sell these cards under the table with no paper trail. And the National is certainly the vehicle, the vessel to do that for a lot of people. So I think that feeds into the popularity of the National, because it's just so appealing to a lot of people to do that type of thing. The upstairs was probably my biggest gripe about the show. A lot of people have talked about it in their recaps, but whoever laid the floor plan for the upstairs needs a swift kick in the ass. Was just so poorly designed up there. And it was unfortunate because it seemed like there was a lot of really good dealers and cards up there. Only spent 20 minutes up there, and 15 of those minutes were stuck in the aisle just trying to get through. I actually saw Dr. Beckett struggling to get through that aisle at the same time. But it was just so poorly designed to cram 75 tables in a very bottlenecked area instead of spreading it out. I did find it very hilarious that the majority of the dealers up there were actually vintage. I know the great narrative and the great fear, I guess, that was being spread was those 75 tables are all going to be Pokemon. It's all going to be TCG. And I think there was maybe one or two Pokemon tables up there, or TCG tables. The majority seemed to be vintage from what I could quickly glance at. There was obviously modern up there as well, but it seemed like the majority was vintage, which I thought was kind of ironic. And then finally, one last observation that I noticed, that I was saying it to a couple of the guys in our Airbnb chat, is I didn't notice it at the time, but through watching a lot of recap videos of showroom floor footage, you really notice the lack of people wearing sports gear, jerseys, shirts, hats, things like that. Everyone was kind of plainclothes and not wearing sports gear. And it seemed in the recaps from the footage of the showroom floor, everyone was carrying a briefcase, a Pelican case, some type of case that had cards in it to sell. And I've always had this great concern. I wouldn't call it a fear. I would call it more of a concern that in the hobby nowadays, we're really moving away from organic sports fandom. Whereas I come from the part of the hobby that I'm a fan of the teams I watch. I'm a passionate Philadelphia sports fan, and my fandom the hobby is an extension of my fandom. I pick up Caitlin Clark cards because I like Caitlin Clark. I'm a fan of her. I watch her games. I pick up Cooper DeJean cards because he had one of the biggest plays for the Eagles in Super Bowl history with that pick six. I pick up a Bobby Shantz card because Bobby Shantz is an absolute Philadelphia sports legend and a Philly show staple. I pick up a Chase Utley card because he means so much to the city of Philadelphia. And maybe it's me overthinking it, but when I see people just walking around with absolutely no sports gear, I often wonder what their connection is to the hobby per se. Are they a collector? Are they a fan? Or are they approaching this from a monetary standpoint? And I think what you're hearing from a lot of different think pieces about the Nationals, how corporate it's gotten, which it certainly hasn't. It's been on that road since 2021, mind you. But we just talk about all these flippers, investors, vintage bros, Kaboom, downtown bros, all this noise you hear, and how it's getting harder and harder to be a collector. And certainly the National is a mirror to the hobby. It's not the end-all be-all for the hobby, but it's certainly a reflection of the current hobby. And I often wonder how many people are actively fans of what they're collecting. How many people are watching baseball games or basketball games or football games, or they're keeping track of their sports. They're in tune with it. And I know I catch flack for saying that type of stuff, but I do think it is important because it builds a connection to what you're collecting if you're approaching this hobby as a collector. And I approach the hobby as a collector. Like I said, my fandom, my collecting is an extension of my fandom, and always has been and always will be. And the thing about the hobby is there's no right way to collect. If you approach it differently, hey, if it works for you, it works for you. But I feel like it's important to get back to the basics, and the basics being fans of specific teams, specific players, and just loving collecting their cards. And I think when you're doing that, you can't go wrong, because you cannot make a wrong purchase that way. You can't live in regret that way. Oh, I should not have bought that. Well, if you're a fan of the team, you're a fan of the player, you're not going to go wrong. But those are just some of my thoughts. Had an absolute blast. It was great meeting up with friends all across the country, talking, hanging out. Looking forward to next year. Looking forward to the next Chicago National, even though that facility, it's too small, fellas. We would love to see it move to McCormick's Place, but I am absolutely thrilled in 2028 we are going to the Mile, because that convention center there is massive. That is a big boy convention center. So definitely hashtag good spaces only, tons of space only. So